Hello, I'm Margaret Campbell and welcome to A Moment in Time. We're here today in the Old Graveyard Memorial Park, and with me is Karen McNutt. She has become, knowingly or unknowingly, an authority on some of the families who are buried here in the park. Just a little bit about the park. This is sort of an encapsulation of some of the earliest part of Giles County and southern Middle Tennessee history. These are some of the first settlers to pass through this way that are buried here. They were buried between 1817 and 1833. The cemetery sort of fell into disrepair. A lot of the markers were knocked over. Some of them were buried even under about 5 inches of soil. When the city took this over as a project to turn it into a historical park, if you will, with the help of the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And it's fascinating. In the records for the city, this was only known as the graveyard. So at one point, this was the place where everybody was buried. Just a few statistics about the park itself. Or the cemetery, there were 218 early settlers from Giles County buried here. Just to give you a look at how history has evolved and what was going on during the period, 36% of the people buried here were children under the age of 6. 16% of them were settlers that were age 50 or younger. So that certainly speaks to the fact that pioneer life was difficult and usually brief. Talks about the migration routes that came through here. Most folks were from Ireland or England. They traveled the traditional routes through North Carolina and Virginia. There were 10 mayors of Pulaski buried here, including the very first. The very first minister of the Presbyterian Church is buried here. They did a beautiful job with the park. Some of the smaller stones, as you can see, are set on curved tables. The stones that were the tops of what were box tombs are mounted on this back wall in stone. And then, as was typical of burial in that early 18th century, there are some obelisks that still remain. The center point actually is off to our right. It's a bronze monument that has a list of plaques with all of the people who were buried here on them. And as I said, Karen has found the park. She came, it's an interesting story, she came to lunch here occasionally and found the peace and beauty of the park spectacular and did a little roaming around. And Karen, tell us some stories about some of the people who are interred here.
I feel like they're my people. I love these people and their families. I have started trying to put the families together to see how they work together, how the businesses work together. I've been trying to recreate the community that was Pulaski in the 1850 is really the best time for research because the census records supplied name of the head of household and everybody in the household, children, even babies. You knew what their occupation was, how much money they had tied up in real estate and personal property, what state they were from. It was just amazing how much, I could find there. But that kind of helps to flesh out the people here to me. The stone that is inscribed with JG only, I have found, well, through the help of the genealogy room in the public library, really, there's a book on the family. And I'm almost certain that JG was James Giddens Sr. He's not just a man to himself who died at the age of 109.
Fascinating, when so many settlers were dying so young.
He actually moved here when he was probably close to 100. He might have been 98 or so when he moved here.
Wow.
Moved here probably with a couple of sons. But anyway, his life was touched with by many of the people who were buried here. He had one son who had a granddaughter who is buried here with her husband. She has a daughter who is buried here and a grandchild that is buried here. That goes down 6 generations. Another son of his had 2 daughters buried here, a granddaughter, relatives of the son-in-law. It just goes on and on for generation after generation. I could name probably 17 people who somehow were related to JG by blood or by marriage. So.
That's great. And there's an interesting story about a young couple who are buried here.
That just
It's a very touching
touched
story.
me. Virginia Hennon married, was it Hennon? I'm sorry, I'm blank on her maiden name now. She married James Topp. They were just young, 16 and 17, something like that, and they were married 1 year before he died. She died 6 weeks later of what was said to be a broken heart. So just, they had so much promise. In fact, there was an article written about, you know, their marriage and how happy everybody was and how bright the future seemed at that time. And, you know, I have to say, my sister asked me one day about this research project. She said, "Do you feel omniscient?" And I thought, well, that's kind of presumptuous at first, but then I thought, I know how their lives began. I know what happened. I know the children they had and the grandchildren. I know their joys or their disappointments. I know so much of that. I know how their lives ended. There's so much I don't know, and they're so good at keeping certain secrets that I'll never know. But I do love seeing the community that was Pulaski.
It's fascinating. The park here does tell a fascinating story about the history of Pulaski and Giles County, and even some of those citizens that their families moved on from here. This was just a stopping place for them. So if you get a chance, come by and see the park. I want to thank Karen so much for being with us today. I can't wait for the book to come out. I'm sure it's going to be fascinating. I want to thank PES and P3 so much for letting us bring this moment in time to you, and we hope you'll join us on the next one. Thanks.